The 603rd edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Alton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered. Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
Oh, they're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for three. Back iron, 1 second to play. Stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys once again tonight, here to officially preview the upcoming 2025-2026 college basketball season from the Carolina perspective. What that means is we'll talk about the three biggest storylines that will define the 2025-26 campaign. We'll play a game of true false, and then we'll hand out our bold predictions to close out this edition of the show. Before we do any of that, though, we start every edition of the pod as we always do with the pod thought of the day. We go to Gabrielle Blair for that pod thought. And that thought is, quote, "Embrace the current season of your life," end quote. And I was trying to find a great quote to set the scene for the upcoming season, and I thought that was one that really applies to where Carolina basketball is right now. I think Hubert Davis needs to embrace coaching at Carolina and coaching at Carolina on the hot seat. I think this roster needs to embrace, playing a season where what they do individually and collectively will, determine the long-term future of its head coach. And it goes for everyone individually, everyone collectively as a group and as a roster. But the one thing that Carolina just simply can't do, they can't run away from the pressure. They can't run away from the expectations. They can't run away from the demands that this program puts upon them as players and coaches, that we as fans put upon them as players and coaches. And usually the teams that embrace the pressure, that embrace the noise, but can kind of block it out simultaneously, those are the teams that have successful years, whether that means they win championships or they just accomplish what they need to accomplish that in that individual season. I look at it from this perspective. There's no way Carolina can do the things they want to do, can do the things they need to do, unless they embrace the challenges that'll come their way this season. And I think what we've learned so far through the two preseason exhibitions is they've got a group that's ready to put in the type of work that's going to take to put the kind of wins on the board that'll make us feel a lot better about this program's outlook under Hubert Davis, which, that long journey gets started in a big way on Monday night.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be like too overly positive, as someone told us on the last edition of the show and said you guys were hand-wringing too much about a win over Winston-Salem State. But it really does feel like this team is locked in, is ready for the challenges that are going to be coming up this year. To me, it's more about you just can't worry about the fact that your head coach, could be fired at the end of the year. That's something that is a possibility. But for you guys, I mean, it's just about going out and putting together a really solid product every single time that you're out on the floor, putting together, a decent amount of wins to where you can get to the NCAA tournament. You just want to be comfortable when it comes to making the NCAA tournament. And so I think that's the mindset that this crew has to have. I think, this is a group that has to embrace the fact that they are not as highly thought of as some previous Carolina teams. This is a group that is going to have to work to get there. And, they are already being dealt a challenge with Luka Bogovac not being eligible. So I definitely think that that's certainly something that, for this group, they've got to find a way to overcome. But so far, in the exhibition against BYU and then in the exhibition against Winston-Salem State, Carolina did not play without him. And, in separate points of each of those games, they looked really good on both ends of the floor. So I think they've gotten to that point where they're embracing the challenges that are ahead of them. Now it's about actually being able to go out and get wins, put it, on display in a regular season game like they will face on Monday against Central Arkansas and like they'll face the rest of the way, especially, coming up in that game on Friday against Kansas where things get turned up pretty quickly.
All right, let's go ahead and get into the first part of this season preview, and that are the three storylines that will define the 2025-26 campaign, and we'll just kind of pick up right where we left off there. The first storyline that will be monitored throughout the entire season will be the job security, the job status of Hubert Davis. There's no denying that from the fan base's perspective, it does appear that he's entering a make-or-break season. We don't really know where Carolina officially stands because they don't really talk about this type of thing publicly, but I think there's been enough unaccomplished that would lead you to believe that he's got to deliver in a big way to really just ensure he keeps the support of Roy Williams, the support of the Carolina basketball family to be the right man for the job going into the next handful of years. And so what I want to do is we'll work in some audio from some national media members, during tonight's edition of the show. This opinion comes from Jeff Goodman, lead college basketball guy, for the Field of 68, longtime, ESPN stadium guy as well. And when we're talking about the upcoming season for Carolina, he simply said that what Carolina has done under Hubert Davis, it just hasn't been good enough.
All I'm saying is, listen, the bottom line is what Carolina has done under Hubert Davis is mediocre. It's mediocre, period, by Carolina standards. You can't push back on that. It's not good enough. They got to the final game, I get it, year one. They were fortunate to get there. We know how much the tournament means. Great job. All right, well, then if you want to say that, well, the third year was kind of the opposite, right? Unbelievable regular season, kind of underachieved in the tournament. Last year, they backed their way in, shouldn't have got in the NCAA tournament. And the second year, they didn't get in the NCAA tournament. So for all intents and purposes, 3 of the 4 years that Hubert Davis has been the head coach at North Carolina, on February 27th, they've been squarely on the bubble. That isn't good enough.
And I think that's the big kicker. It's really just the fact that every year but one, this team has been a bona fide bubble team, deep into February, as early into the first week of March. And for a program that's gone to 21 Final Fours, that's won a national championship, in every decade since the 1950s, yeah, that's not meeting the mark. And so if Hubert Davis maybe still had the same resume in March, but with teams that were, a lot more firmly in the tournament, do I think he'd be firmly on the hot seat? I think the answer would be no. I think what complicates this is he missed the tournament as a preseason number 1 team, first team in the country to ever do that. Was this past year the last team into the field while being preseason number 9. And so that kind of does complicate your run to the national championship. I'll disagree with Goodman saying they underachieved 2 years ago. Like, the team that knocked Carolina out of the tournament went to the Final Four. And that was the team that in that specific tournament really gave UConn as much as they could handle on their way to back-to-back national championships. So to say that they underachieved, yeah, from a seed perspective, yes, but when you look at who they lost to and what that team would go on to do, I would find it hard to say they underachieved. They just ran into a better team that night on a neutral floor. The second part of Hubert's job security is the hardest, I think, for us to get a gauge on. And that's simply, what does he have to do to ensure that he's back in 2026, 2027? You heard from Jeff Goodman talk about what Carolina has done under Hubert Davis has been mediocre. Well, Jeff Borzello, lead guy for ESPN, he was on the same podcast where Goodman made those comments, and he kind of addressed what Hubert Davis has to do to ensure he's back on the sidelines next year.
I mean, I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I mean, I lean more toward Goodman. I just think that he's judged, RC mentioned he's judged based on what Duke's been doing. He's also judged on just the expectations of Carolina. And
of course.
Having even this year, the top 25 caliber team should make the tournament. Is that good enough? It's just making the tournament good enough this year. I don't know. I mean, it seems, Carolina is used to deep runs in the tournament. Now they've made 2 in his 4 years, and, that's commendable. It's just, does he have to make another Sweet 16 run this year just to be safe?
And I think that's something that you and I, we've spent a lot of time talking about this. And I think that if he does make the Sweet 16, there's no doubt in your mind he's your head coach next year. That'd be 3 Sweet 16s in 5 years. That's pretty doggone good, especially in the current climate of college basketball where transfer portal and NIL, does make it easier in some ways to rebuild every single year. But, you're not just the only program that's rebuilding. I think like the worst case scenario is, let's say Carolina finishes top 4 in the ACC. They got 25 plus wins. They earn a 3 seed come Selection Sunday. They win that 3-14 matchup, but they get a good 3-6 game. You see a lot of 3-6s where the 6 seed advances to the second weekend. I think BYU was a 6 seed last year. They make it to the Sweet 16. Let's say Carolina gets beat 82-80 in a highly contested ball game where the opponent makes another play. Then what do you do with him? And I think that's what makes this so uncertain and so muddy. I think in a lot of ways, I think we would benefit if Bubba Cunningham, if Roy Williams released a statement and said, Hubert Davis has to do X, Y, and Z to ensure he's Carolina's head coach in 2026, 2027. They're not going to do that. But the fact that they don't speak on these matters does complicate kind of looking into the future, because I don't know if he gets upset in the second round by, let's say, another power conference opponent, if he deserves to lose his job, although many Carolina fans would feel that way.
Well, many Carolina fans feel like he should lose his job right now. There are a lot of people that believe that he hasn't done what he's needed to do even this offseason to get Carolina in position to be where they need to be this year. So you can't listen to the fans. The fans should not make a decision on something like this. This is a decision that should come down to new athletic director Steve Newmark, who will probably be the guy that will be making the evaluation on this. In terms of what ultimately they're going to end up doing. For me, if he ends up making the second weekend of the tournament, I think as long as he makes the tournament comfortably, I think he's going to be fine. Because I just don't think that there are these people that are banging down Carolina's door to take this job. I mean, we've talked about it. The family aspect of it, you don't have a clear guy. You don't have a Roy Williams that you had back when you made that hire in 2004. I mean, that doesn't exist right now. So where does that guy come from? Is there somebody that we don't know nationally that has told them behind the scenes, yeah, I'm in. I would take the job, no questions asked, and they would go in that direction. I don't know if that even happens. So until they know that they have somebody that is willing to take the job, that is better than Hubert Davis, as long as he makes the NCAA tournament and does so comfortably, I think he will be perfectly fine. To me, if he gets to the second round, and look, if you're a 6 seed, I mean, especially this year, it depends on, I guess, what it ends up looking like. If you don't have Luka Bogovac for the entire season, then I think there is going to be some grace that's going to be given to him. Then, yeah, you probably feel decent about where Carolina ends up. If they get beat by a 3 seed, it just depends on what that 3 seed goes on to be able to do. That may also factor into how you feel about it. But for me, I think as long as he makes the NCAA tournament comfortably, I would have him coming back next year. That's just my personal opinion. Now, in terms of his overall tenure and what was said by Jeff Goodman, I don't think it's the craziest thing. I think he's probably right that it really has been pretty mediocre what you have seen in terms of Carolina standards. And that's the thing that's important to say, is that it's by Carolina standards. It's by blue blood standards when it comes to the programs that you're comparing them with. Because if this was happening at Wake Forest or any other team, really in the ACC besides Duke, most people would say, hey, we'll take that run. That's really all we're asking for. And Carolina, in his first year, I'm the guy that has said he deserves the credit for the run that he had in his first year. A lot of people want to credit that to Roy Williams and say, well, Roy Williams was the one that brought in all the talent. Look, I love Roy, man. That's definitely true. But Hubert was the guy that coached those guys to the national championship game. I mean, that is an accomplishment. That's something that you have to do as a coach, is to get that group to cohesively work together the way that it did. And the fact that he was able to do that is nothing short of a miracle based on what we saw after that. I mean, that really was an amazing run for Carolina to get it all to work together. And you remember that some of the key pieces on that team, including Brady Manek, were brought in by Hubert Davis. So I think he deserves credit for that. I think he deserves credit for a couple of years ago where Carolina was a team that was a number 1 overall seed. You mentioned they fall to a team that goes to the Final Four in Alabama, a team that I think a lot of people feel like is going to be one of the best teams in the country again this year, and really year in and year out. That's become a very consistent group. So there's no shame in losing that game for Carolina. But the down years, the fact of the matter is that even with that season where Carolina makes a run, coming into February, they were a team that was on the bubble. You don't want to be at that point as a blue blood program. So I believe that it has to get better, because what you're seeing is mediocre from Carolina standards. But I do believe that if he makes the tournament safely this year, he will be back starting next season.
Yeah, I said it back earlier this summer. I think to ensure no questions asked, he's Carolina's head coach, there's 2 things he can do. He can win an ACC regular season championship, or make the second weekend for the 3rd time in 5 years. If he does either of those 2 things, then you're not having a conversation. I do think that, if he was a 3 seed in the tournament, but to get upset by a 14 seed, I do think we would probably be having a conversation after that game about his job security. So, yeah, that would be him making the tournament safely, but having a tournament exit that should not happen at a school like Carolina. So that's why I think, if you win an ACC regular season title, which this program values more than winning the tournament, then that would give him 2 in 5 years. I think, okay, at that point, you at least bring him back for the next year. If he makes the second weekend, then you're not even having a conversation. He would just be Carolina's head coach until, proven otherwise. So, but this is going to be the dominant storyline of the season for Carolina. It'll be the thing we talk about when they get big wins, is what does this do for his job status? And it'll be the thing we talk about when they suffer heartbreaking losses, is what does this do for his job status? That's why it's the number 1 storyline for this upcoming season. The second storyline I have written down is, how does Carolina maximize Caleb Wilson's potential loan season in Chapel Hill? The preseason or the incoming top 10 freshman has looked apart, 2 double-doubles and 2 exhibitions, both while scoring over 20 points per game or 20 points in those games. To record those double-doubles, he's been, a fierce competitor on both ends of the floor. He's been everything and more that we were told he was going to be upon arriving on campus. And so with that, kind of expectations have started to kind of climb and accelerate as we get closer and closer to the start of the season, to the point where, former Carolina basketball legend, in my opinion, the best player to ever play at UNC, Tyler Hansbrough, he joined our friend over at the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, Isaac Shade, and kind of talked about what he sees in Caleb Wilson's game and what that can mean for Carolina's ceiling.
I think big picture, I think if this team reaches its ceiling, and I think for them to reach their ceiling, I think it's going to depend upon Caleb Wilson and his ability to really grow, because I think he's a player that plays just like Marvin Williams. I think he's a player that has that type of talent, that athleticism. I think if he develops, we have a guy we can give the ball to at any position on the court, and he can score. I think big picture, if we're talking about what this team's capable of doing, I would not rule out a Final Four run if this team reaches its ceiling. And I know it's very optimistic. And when I say big picture, I'm talking about everything gelling together the way it could happen.
All right, so, since Caleb Wilson really committed, we've kind of compared him more to being that Harrison Ingram guy for Carolina under Hubert Davis. Ingram, 2 years ago was an undersized 4-man, but was a real big part of what Carolina was able to do. Led the ACC in rebounding that year in conference games, and was an integral part of that culture of that year's roster. So that's kind of where we've been focusing on comparing them to. But as we've seen Carolina play, and other people have seen Carolina play, that Marvin Williams name has been thrown around. Obviously, Marvin Williams was a big part of the 2005 national championship team. That was just before our time getting into, Carolina basketball the way that we are into it now. I mean, I have a reference of what Marvin Williams was and how important he was to Carolina for that championship. I don't think they win the title without him. When you hear Tyler Hansbrough, arguably the greatest Carolina basketball player of all time, compare him to Marvin Williams and say that if he has the similar impact that Marvin had on this year's roster, that Carolina can make a Final Four run, what comes to your mind?
I mean, that would be amazing. I think the thing that's so different about him and Marvin is that Marvin was a guy that came off the bench for that 2005 group. There was just so much more talent around him than I think there is going to be with this group. Now, does that mean that I don't think there are going to be talented guys on this roster that step up and make plays? No, of course not. But I think his role is going to be a little bit different. He's going to be counted on as the player for this team. And that was something that Marvin never really had to deal with. Now, do I think that Marvin could have succeeded in that type of role? Oh, certainly. I mean, especially when you saw what he became at the NBA level, I thought he could have handled being a guy at the college level that was counted on by Carolina and had to be one of the leading scorers for the team. There's no doubt in my mind that Caleb Wilson is a guy that has to be one of the leading scorers for this Tar Heel team. But I think in terms of comparing his game, I do think that there is a lot of comparables. I mean, you talk about just an effort guy that brings it every single play on the floor, no matter what end of the floor it is. That's what you're getting in Caleb Wilson. I think he's got the ability to stretch the floor. We've seen that. That's the reason why he's going to be able to play that 3 spot for Carolina while Luka Bogovac is getting everything cleared up with the NCAA or with Carolina, rather, whatever they're having to go through. And I think, the way that he's able to score at basically every level, I really do think is somewhat similar to what we saw from Marvin when he was at Carolina and then eventually once he gets to the NBA level. Ultimate comparison is what he does defensively. He can guard anywhere from the 5 to the 1. And again, I know that some people are going to say, well, if you've got a 7-foot big man, how is he going to be able to guard him? Trust me, with the effort that he brings, I do think he could probably handle himself and be perfectly fine. But he's so athletic that no matter what you do, if you put him in these pick and roll situations and he has to switch, he's going to be perfectly fine and able to handle it. So I really think the sky is the limit for him. I think he has a chance to be the nation's best freshman this year. I think that a lot of people look at that and think that's crazy because of the Boozer twins at Duke, because of AJ Dybantsa at BYU. But I think with what we've seen so far in the first 2 exhibitions, he's going to be right there with those guys and competing to be freshman of the year in the sport of college basketball. That might be a little bit of a preview of the bold prediction, but I do think that he has certainly shown that he has those capabilities.
Yeah, I kind of like the fact that he's kind of flying under the radar as a top 10 freshman entering the year. Part of that's because Dybantsa is really freaking good. What Boozer did against Tennessee, albeit in exhibition form, when you do 24 points, 23 rebounds against a power conference opponent, that's gonna accelerate the expectations for you. But he has had 2 double-doubles where he scored over 20 points, where he shot over 50% from the field. And it feels like we've come out of these games, and not you and I per se, but local, the local media and the Carolina basketball community is talking about, well, Kyan Evans isn't doing this, or and Vassar only had 1 rebound against Winston-Salem State, yada yada yada. And it's like, guys, are y'all seeing how good this kid is, and how he is, has done a lot of talking leading up to his arrival, and through 2 exhibitions, he's been the best player on the floor, you could argue, in both games. And so, if he can have the impact that Marvin Williams had, then yeah, I do think Final Four's on the table for Carolina. Is he entering a championship ready roster like Marvin Williams did? No, he's not. He's not entering a roster like 2 years ago. Like if he joined the roster 2 years ago, you could argue that was a championship ready roster. Or even 3 years ago, when, like, let's say he was the guy that was playing the 4 for Carolina as opposed to Pete Nance. Like, on the surface, that was a championship ready roster. There's a difference with that delineation here with this version of Carolina, but given how skilled he is and how hard he competes, he could be the guy that really pushes this roster over the top. I do think it's imperative that they maximize every ounce of his ability to make recruiting these types of kids easier. As because there's no doubt, there's no denying, Carolina has struggled to get these guys on their campus because they haven't maximized them. And part of it's just the way Carolina operates. But at some point, man, like, we want the talent. Well, you've got to maximize the talent. And so whether that means you make a Final Four, or he's the ACC Player of the Year, or, is an All-American, I don't know what exactly that has to be. But he's got to be a player that represents to the next top 10 recruit Carolina is going after hardcore, that they can look at that situation and say, I can go there and thrive. Because if we're being honest, there hasn't been too many of those type of recruits that have been able to say that here in the last couple of years, because Hubert Davis has struggled to develop their talent. So I do think that if he can do that, that'll make recruiting his type of talented, or at least those types of talented high schoolers, a whole lot easier moving forward, which would, of course, ease the doubts and concerns about having the right guy on the bench to lead the program. The last storyline that we'll tackle before we get to a game or true false is the money that Carolina's invested. And I find it odd that, since we've heard what Kentucky's invested among other schools, that, people haven't really circled back around to kind of say Carolina didn't overspend on its roster. But that was the narrative that was out there when it became reported that this year's Carolina roster, cost about $14 million. Now, granted, you brought in 11 new players, and all 11 of those players you're paying in some capacity. But the real question is did they correctly invest the $14 million into this roster? And we will have to get Luka on the court to get the best evaluation of that. But we've seen Carolina in 2 games so far without him, and we've seen some guys that they've invested a lot of money in: Kyan Evans, Jaron Stevenson, Henry Vassar, Jonathan Powell, so on and so forth. And so that to me, I think, is the third biggest storyline attached to Carolina entering this year. Because if Carolina wins, it's going to be, well, they spent $14 million on their roster. They should be winning. But if Carolina doesn't win, the narrative is going to be, how do you invest $14 million and still got it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be any year that you spend money like this. And Carolina is going to spend money like this every single year moving forward. So ultimately, yeah, you're going to want to know whether or not the roster construction is correct. I think that this roster construction so far, based off of what we've seen, and again, it's just 2 exhibitions and a couple of scrimmages, but it really feels like this roster is built much more like what we expect from Carolina. You've got some size on this roster that is legitimate. It bothered Winston-Salem State the other night. I think it bothered BYU at certain times during that exhibition, the size that Carolina has. And yeah, I mean, Henry Vassar, only comes away with 1 rebound the other day. I think that's something that's going to change as they move forward. He knows that he has to be aggressive, but also if you're going to get rebounding performances like you got the other night from Caleb Wilson and Jaron Stevenson, that takes the pressure off of Henry Vassar to be able to go in there and rebound at an incredibly high rate. I mean, you still would expect that he's going to be a guy that is going to be one of your leading rebounders. I don't think that there's any reason to believe that's not going to be the case based off of what we saw the other night, even though there are some people that probably feel like that. But I think, he was a smart investment for them. Jaron Stevenson looks like that was a very smart investment for them. I think Luka, once he gets out there on the court, you will see that he was a smart investment for Carolina. It's going to be some of the other guys on the roster that I think some people are going to question. Jonathan Powell, was that really worth going out and getting him? Is he a guy that off the bench is able to provide a little bit of pop for Carolina, especially early on if Luke is not going to play? Jaden Young, is he a guy that can help ease some of the transition that Derek Dixon and Isaiah Dennis are going to feel in that backcourt coming in? I think what he showed the other night in the second half against Winston-Salem State is that he is going to be capable of doing that. And again, it's against the Division II opponent, but I do think that that's something that'll be interesting to monitor as we go throughout the year. I think, yeah, the $14 million, people are going to make a lot of that. But when you look at it and you look at some of the guys that Carolina was able to get, I mean, if they have the impacts that we think they're going to, led by Caleb Wilson, who we just talked about, then I don't think anybody's going to be complaining that this roster costs as much as it does. I think this is a very well put together roster. I think it's a very complimentary roster, which is something that I think, is really tough for people to understand when it comes to the offseason. I think people just want to try to get the best guys, throw them all together and hope that it works, where you've got to look for guys that whose games really do fit one another and fit the system that you want to run. It feels like Carolina's got those guys, and I fully expect that when we're sitting here at the end of the year, we're going to be talking about the investment that Carolina made and say it was a pretty positive one overall.
Yeah, I look at the roster right now, and this is the best put together roster Carolina has had under Hubert Davis. And how much of that is because you have a GM on the payroll now? I don't know. I think it helps. But you have legitimate size, depth, lineup flexibility, lineup continuity that you just frankly haven't had in his previous 4 seasons. Roster construction was the buzzword around the sport a year ago. It's going to be the buzzword around the sport this year. And I do think that this is the best put together roster we've seen so far from Hubert Davis and his coaching staff, and really excited to see kind of how that translates, because I do think that the roster is equipped to overcome an extended absence of Luka Bogovac. They need him to be the best version of themselves, But I do think they can overcome his absence, as you've seen in the first two exhibitions with the way that Jaron Stevenson has played since transferring in from over at Alabama. Let's now run through a quick game of true or false. I have 6 different scenarios that I want to ask true or false to Anthony. If you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter, feel free to comment as well. So the first one, speaking of Luka, we're sitting here 2 days away from the start of the season. He has not been officially cleared by the university to play college basketball. He has been cleared by the NCAA. And there's just a lot of different side reporting to really lead you one way or another to tell you who's at fault for why this situation has not been resolved. We're not going to dive into that. But the first true-false scenario might be a layup just considering how close we are to the start of the season. But true or false, Luka Bogovac plays in every regular season this game, or every regular season game this year for Carolina.
This one feels like a layup, unfortunately, and I think the answer is false. We are here on Saturday night before the Monday night game against Central Arkansas, and we have no update on his status. That's the thing that's the most concerning, is not only do we not have, any confirmation that he's cleared to play, we have no reporting going on about what is going on with this situation. So how how expedited this process is, I don't think we really know. And that's what's concerning to us, is that this does not seem to be at the forefront of the concern of the university, where it should be one of the main things that they're concerned about right now, especially this time of year. It feels like, what else do you really have to be that concerned about? Everybody else is in school, is enrolled, is ready to go. Luka is on campus taking classes right now, as far as we know. And so they need to get this thing figured out as soon as possible. I would say that answer is false. And I think we're going to go a pretty decent amount of time before we actually know whether or not he's going to be able to play this year. It feels like this is going to take a lot longer than we originally thought it was going to, especially with some of the reporting that came out over the last couple of days about what exactly is holding it up.
Yep, I would say now, definitely, I would say false. I don't see a situation that he plays Monday night against Central Arkansas. I'm still hopeful, optimistic he'll be ready to go against Kansas, but that's probably because I want to win that game as much as any game on the schedule, outside of the games against Duke and NC State this year, just given the history and the track record with the Jayhawks. It's unfortunate that this is where we are, considering the fact that we can no longer blame the NCAA for that being the holdup. The NCAA's did its job. It's cleared him. He's ready to go, but he hasn't done what he has to do to satisfy Carolina to be ready to take the court. And my thing is this. You now live in a day and time where you are paying these athletes to play basketball for you. You should be doing whatever it takes to ensure that player is ready to go when the season starts, so you're not wasting your investment. You're not investing in a player that's not on the basketball court helping you win basketball games. And that looks like that's going to be the case right now. And this is the downside when you go the international route. I don't think this will deter Hubert Davis moving forward. It'll probably just make them get on get on their horse a little bit quicker, as opposed to waiting till mid to late May to start trying to find an international player. They might start doing that, in January or February in the upcoming season. Second true or false scenario, Caleb Wilson will lead Carolina in scoring as a freshman.
Yeah, I would have told you probably a couple of weeks ago that I wasn't sure about this one. I probably would have maybe gone false and said that Seth Trimble led this team in scoring. I believe now the answer is true. I think what you've seen the first two exhibitions is what's going to extend over into the regular season. And I think the big thing is that when you look at this half-court offense, the guy that right now is your best player in that area of the game is Caleb Wilson. And so to me, if he's able to score the ball the way that he scored it against BYU, well, then he should be able to score it like that against Central Arkansas, against Navy, against East Carolina. those teams in the non-conference and allow him to really get off to a strong start to the season where he's leading Carolina in scoring. And then by the time that they get to conference play, you feel like he'll be settled in and really ready to show what exactly he brings to the table as a true freshman. I think he's going to lead this team in scoring. I don't think it's going to be by a huge margin. I think there are going to be some other guys that are going to put up some decent scoring numbers this season. But I do believe that he is going to be the guy that ends up leading this team in scoring, which is amazing to think with Carolina's issues when it's come to developing 5 stars here recently.
Yeah, Luka still, I think, because I think he's going to play enough games to where he could still average out as Carolina's leading scorer. But I've looked at Caleb Wilson's game, and I've looked at the way that he scored in the first 2 exhibitions while yet to get involved from the perimeter, and he's going to get a lot of buckets at the rim. I think he's going to get to the foul line very frequently. He's got a mid-range game that really you cannot guard. He can, grab a rebound and take the ball down the court and get downhill. And he's a dynamic scorer in a lot of different ways. And we're talking about maximizing his potential and his talent. If he leads Carolina in scoring, that would be a sign of indication that they're getting every bit out of him that they can. I think he does. I think this is true. I think Caleb Wilson will be Carolina's leading scorer for 2025, 2026. This is a fun one that I like to put in. I think just about every single year we do this one when we play a game of true or false. But, you look at this roster, and it's still built to be an offensive juggernaut. There's still scoring potential where this could be the highest scoring team in the ACC, and a team that averages over 80 points per game on a nightly basis, game in, game out. To do that, you've got to have a lot of scoring punch in your starting lineup. True or false, all 5 starters will average double-figure scoring for Carolina.
I'm going to go with false. I do not think that Kyan Evans averages double figures. I do think that part of it is that you will have the scoring output that you have from Caleb Wilson. You're going to have the scoring output that you'll have from Seth Trimble, and you're going to have what you get from Henry Vasar that I think, at least out of the gate to start the season is going to be enough where he doesn't have to necessarily be involved. Then if you possibly add Luka Bogovac to that, then you're talking about, a guy that could be second, third on the team in scoring. It just doesn't feel like there is enough there for all 5 starters to average double figures. But what I will say is that I do still think that Kyan Evans will be very impactful with how he shares the basketball, with how he controls the game in the half court. So even though I don't think he gets to double figures scoring this year, I still think he's going to be able to score the ball more than we saw Elliot Cadeau be able to do. I still think he's going to be able to hit some shots that Carolina is going to need him to. I just think he falls just short of that double-figure scoring mark, probably somewhere around like 9.8 points per game, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I'm going to go false as well. Part of it is I don't think Jared Stevenson, who would be projected to start in place of Luka, I don't think he'd be a double-digit point per game scorer. And I love Kyan Evans, and I'm going to back that kid as much as anyone can. But from what I've seen, I don't think he's going to be a double-digit scorer for the totality of the season. It could be a situation where as we split it up and we break it down into conference play or whatever, maybe he's a double-digit scorer. But over the totality of the season, no, I think that answer right now is no. The 3 guys I'm confident will average double figures, Trimble, Wilson, and Vasar, I think will average double-figure scoring for Carolina this upcoming season. Speaking of Henry Vasar, he transferred in from Arizona. He was the big that Carolina coveted in the transfer portal after there being just a clear miss in the front court a year ago. True or false, Henry Vasar will prove to be the most impactful transfer for Carolina this upcoming season.
So this one, I have to ask you a question. Do we consider Luka Bogovac a transfer, or do we consider him just a regular addition to the roster?
I just list him as an international pro because that's what he is. He's not transferring in from another college. He's transferring in from, he's joining the roster after being an overseas pro. So I would exclude Luka from this conversation.
Then the answer is very clearly yes to me, because I think once you get Luka cleared at some point, you hope this season, then he's going to be the only transfer that is in the starting lineup besides a guy in Kyan Evans that, as I said, I just don't feel like is going to be a guy that scores double figures, where I think Henry Visar is going to score double figures. I think he is going to be a guy that's going to, I'm not going to say average double figures rebounding, but I think he could average somewhere around 7 per game, because I think Caleb Wilson is going to get his rebounds. Jaren Stevenson, for the time being, is going to get his rebounds. And I think that you have seen contributions in years past, especially from a guy like Seth Trimble on the glass as well. But I think, yeah, he's got to be Carolina's most impactful transfer, right? Because he's got to be the guy that is, altering shots on the one end of the floor, setting a lot of really strong screens for Carolina on the other end of the floor, and finishing at the rim when he gets a chance. I think that's going to be key for him, is that when he gets his opportunities, he's got to be able to give Carolina some sort of scoring punch down low. I think he's going to be able to do everything that Carolina needs him to do at a pretty high level. He's a guy that, we've said, some NBA scouts have said he is an NBA prospect that could have gotten drafted this past year if he had chosen to go to the draft. He decides to return to the college level and transfers to Carolina. So I think he is definitely going to be the most impactful transfer that Carolina has on their roster.
Yeah, look, I'd love to say this answer is Kyan Evans and that this answer is false because of how much I propped Kyan Evans up in the offseason. I'm going to, from what I've seen from Visar and just I think what he does for Carolina in the half court on both ends of the floor, I think what he'll be able to do as a pick and roll scorer, his ability to pick and pop and hit threes, so on and so forth, I think he'll be the most impactful transfer. And I think the guy that has the second best case, and I know it's a small sample size, if Jaren Stevenson can be for Carolina what he's been in the 2 exhibitions, he's going to be a difference maker in a way that maybe even I underestimated upon him arriving from Alabama. But I do think right now that answer is Visar. And I think that, he's going to be, we'll be talking about him in a way that if Carolina would have had a big like him a year ago, they would have better maximized, RJ Davis's final season in Chapel Hill than what they were able to do being a team that went out in the NCAA tournaments round of 64. 2 more quick true false, and then we'll move on to our bold predictions before we do get out of here. True or false, Carolina finishes in the top 4 in the ACC and earns the all-important double bye for the ACC tournament.
Yeah, this one's true. I mean, this might be the most confident I've been in anyone that's on this list. And the part of that is that, yeah, Carolina, I think, is going to be a team that is going to be top 25 all season long. If you do that, you will be top 4 in the ACC. And I think the other part of it is just that we don't really know a lot about the other teams in the ACC. So I think it's equal parts Carolina's good, and as well as the rest of this conference just isn't really that good. I think that you look at it, you trust Duke, Louisville, and Carolina, and that's really it. NC State, I think, is probably that next team that you have there at 4, but I don't think that's one that you can guarantee me is going to be successful, is going to have the type of success that Will Wade believes that his crew is going to have. And then after that, I don't really know anybody else in the ACC that I feel uber confident in going into this season. I know there are a lot of people that are high on Virginia. They believe that that's a team that's going to be able to have some success under first-year coach Ryan Odom. I know there's other people that are still really high on Clemson, mainly because of what Brad Brownell has done the last couple of years there, but they lost a lot in the offseason. So to me, with the uncertainty of the other teams in the ACC, I feel like that bodes well for Carolina, but I also think this team is just talented enough where they're going to be able to finish top 4. I think they're guaranteed to finish top 3. So I think they will definitely get that double bye and be in contention to win this regular season ACC title.
Yeah, this is a you better finish top 4 in the league. Because if not, then we go back to the biggest storyline entering the season. Probably doesn't bode well for Hubert Davis's long-term future in Chapel Hill. Had I had a voting say in the matter, I would have voted Carolina third in the ACC. I think Louisville's going to win the league. I think Duke is going to finish second. Carolina third. I have Virginia fourth. The more that I've learned about that roster, Ryan Odom's a heck of a coach. I'd have the Cavaliers fourth, and then I'd have NC State, Will Wade, and his crew. I'd have them coming in fifth. But yes, I do think Carolina does finish top four in the league, which would assure them the all-important double bye in the ACC tournament. The last true false for you before we get to our bold predictions. This will kind of give a hint to where we go with our bold predictions, but nonetheless, we'll do it here in true false. True or false, Carolina makes it to at least the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament.
I say true. I believe that Carolina is going to be a team that's probably going to be somewhere around a 3 or 4 seed this season. I don't know if it could be a little bit higher than that. I think it really just depends on ultimately where they come in when it comes to the regular season. I think they are at least going to make the Sweet 16. I think that Hubert Davis is a good enough tournament coach. I think this roster is talented enough to where Carolina is able to successfully do that. So I feel pretty confident in saying that they are going to reach the Sweet 16. Probably the second most confident thing that I have on this list when it comes to the ones that I have listed as true.
Yeah, I would say true as well. I'm not going to give you as far of a hint as where I think Carolina will do in March Madness, but this is to me a second weekend of the tournament roster. And I think Hubert Davis is a second weekend of the tournament type of coach where even if he has to maybe outcoach a coach to get Carolina there, I do think that's very much on the table. So I do think that is true that Carolina does get to at least the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament. Time for bold predictions. We'll both give 3. And then I've got a few closing notes to go over, and then we'll wrap it up here on a Sunday or a Saturday night edition of the podcast. We'll go back and forth, so one for me, one for you, until we go through our 3 bold predictions. I'll go first with my first bold prediction is Caleb Wilson earns all ACC honors, and he is the he's the ACC Player of the Year. So I think he is the ACC Player of the Year. Is a first-team All-ACC member, ACC Newcomer of the Year, whatever thing that applies to a first-year player. I think Caleb Wilson gets that over the boozer from Duke. And Mikael Brown coming in at Louisville. There's a lot of hype around him as well. I think Caleb Wilson outduels both of them to be the ACC Player of the Year and really just have the type of season that we wanted, Nazir Little to maybe have, or some other high-flying freshman in the years past. I think Caleb Wilson has that, and so I think my first bold prediction is he's the ACC Player of the Year on his way to earning multiple All-ACC honors.
So the thing that's crazy is you took the first one that I was going to have, so I went in a different direction because I believe that you are 100% right. I think he is going to be a first-team All-ACC member, and I do think that he is going to earn ACC Player of the Year, which means that he will be an All-American. He will be somewhere on that All-American list. So I think that ends up happening for him. I really think he's going to have that special of a season. I think he will be joined on that All-ACC team. I think he's going to be joined by Seth Trimble, and I think that Seth Trimble ends up getting first-team All-ACC honors this year. I told you that I really thought that Caleb Wilson was going to lead the team in scoring but not by that big of a margin. The reason why is I really think that Seth Trimble is going to be able to score the ball at a really high rate this year. Feels like last year, we talked about sort of the 2 halves of the season that he had. The first half where he was fully healthy, and the second half after he sustained the concussion, that was where the shooting numbers went down for him. I think those shooting numbers will be back up for him. And the best part about his offensive game, as we know, is his ability to attack the basket and either finish or get to the line. I think you're going to see that again this year. He's going to elevate himself as a scorer because he knows that he has to take that next step. And then when you talk about him defensively, you're talking about maybe the best defender in the ACC. And I don't think people talk about that enough. I think that will be something that some of the voters will definitely take into account with how good he's going to be defensively this year. I think he's going to be motivated after last year where, there were some moments where he wasn't necessarily great defensively. I think this year we're seeing it already, especially with Carolina looking like they're going to full court press a little bit more than they did last year. I definitely think that Seth Trimble has a really strong case at the end of the year to be a first-team All-ACC member, and I think he'll end up making it.
My second bold prediction for the upcoming year is I think Carolina goes undefeated at home. And with that, that would entail that they get some pretty significant wins in Chapel Hill against teams like Kansas. Georgetown visits Carolina this year, and for those of you that keep up with the preseason stuff, Georgetown beat Kentucky the other night, and that was after Kentucky beat Purdue, and Purdue enters the season preseason number 1. That would at least lead you to believe that Georgetown might be ready to go to the dance for the first time under Ed Cooley. They also get Duke, obviously, but Louisville also comes to town as well. And that'd be 4, I think, signature marquee wins at home for Carolina in a make-or-break year for your head coach. Those, I would imagine, would be at least 3 quad 1 wins, something Carolina has struggled in at different times as well under Hubert Davis. So, most years, some people might call that a layup because, how many big home games are you playing? Well, Carolina's playing quite a bit of marquee home games, both in the non-con and, of course, in conference play. And I'd like to see them get back to defending home court much better than they have at certain times under Hubert Davis. I think they do that this year. I think the Heels go undefeated at home in 2025, 2026.
Yeah, my second bold prediction is that I think Carolina wins the ACC tournament. I don't think they win the ACC regular season. I think that'll probably go Duke's way. I do think that Louisville is very, very talented. There's no doubt about that. But I think that Duke, as we've seen year in and year out under John Shire, they are a team that is well put together. I believe that they've got a freshman that is incredibly talented in Cameron Boozer. His brother, Caden, also really talented player that I think is going to be able to give them a chance to win the ACC this season. But I think when it comes ACC tournament time, that's where you could see Duke crack a little bit. I also think, Louisville, a really, really talented group, that would probably be, a team that Carolina has to face, not in the final, but in the semifinal. I think Carolina, with a little bit more desperation for them, not saying that they're going to need it to get into the NCAA tournament, but I think for them, a better chance to improve their ACC or their seeding in the NCAA tournament, as opposed to if they don't win, I think Carolina will make a run. We've talked about how this is something that Hubert Davis values a little bit more so than Roy Williams did, sort of values it a little bit like Dean Smith did. And so I believe that this is going to be valued by Carolina this year. I think they're going to take advantage of it. And I think Carolina will walk away winners of the ACC tournament in Charlotte in March.
All right. So what's really cool about this is that was going to be my last bold prediction as well, was that Carolina, 10 years removed from last winning the ACC tournament, they get back to the final, they cut down the nets. And this is something, and I think it's probably because, as you mentioned, Hubert values it more than Roy Williams did, which makes sense. Hubert Davis played at Carolina. He played in the ACC tournament when it was still a real big thing. And it's still a big thing. I got to cover that event last year, and you could see how important it was to a Duke roster full of freshmen to win that event. It's still the granddaddy of them all for conference tournaments leading into the big tournament. So I'm going to give it a 2-parter. I think Carolina wins the ACC tournament, first time in 10 years. And then I'll piggyback off with this. I'm not going to declare that Carolina makes the Final Four. God knows I wish I could go there, but I just can't. I think the Tar Heels go the furthest of any ACC team in the NCAA tournament. So I think they'll be the last team from the conference standing. I think they'll play longer than Louisville, longer than Duke, Virginia State, so on and so forth. I don't know what that entails. That could mean they get to the Final Four, they get to the national title game. That could mean they get to the Elite Eight. But I do think Carolina is the last ACC team playing in March Madness.
Yeah, I don't know if I can go that bold because I do really think that Louisville is a team that come NCAA tournament time is certainly going to be able to make some noise. There's going to be a lot of motivation there after how things ended in Pat Kelsey's first year, where a lot of people felt like they were a team that was destined to potentially make a little bit of a run, and they go out in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Duke also incredibly talented. They can make another run. But I do think that Carolina makes the Elite Eight, and maybe that's not bold enough. Maybe people say, oh, I mean, for some people that might be, hey, that's where they got to get to for Hubert Davis to save his job. I think you're crazy if that's actually what you believe, but I do think that Carolina will at least be able to make it to the Elite Eight. I think Caleb Wilson alone, the way that he's playing, I think he's good enough to be able to carry Carolina there. But I think you're going to have help from guys like Seth Trimble, Henry Vesar, eventually Luka Bogovac, I think does end up playing for Carolina. I mean, maybe that's a bold prediction at this point that we actually see him out there on the court for Carolina this year. I also think the depth of this roster. I really do think that that's an area that people are not talking about enough here in the preseason. Everybody wants to focus on what the starting lineup is going to be for Carolina, but I believe that Carolina went out and did enough to depth-wise to be able to have one of the better benches in the conference. And I think that's going to show up when you get into the NCAA tournament, that Carolina is able to still go 8, 9 deep on the bench. That's going to be so much different than in years past. So I think this is a team, we've talked about it so much, how this is a group that, you know, coming in, we didn't necessarily know how good they're going to be. I think they're going to be pretty good to start out the season, but I think they're only going to get better as the year goes along. So I think Carolina makes it to the Elite Eight this year, easily saving Hubert Davis's job for another year and getting people talking about Carolina once again being one of the elite teams in college basketball.
Look, on the surface, it would hurt to be that close to the Final Four and to fall short, but if we get to cover another deep run, to the second weekend of the tournament, selfishly, you and I were not going to complain about that. And yeah, for two guys that, back Hubert Davis, that want him to be the guy for the long term, if he does achieve an Elite Eight run, that would solidify himself, as the rightful guy to be Carolina's head coach. Something that to me, that's my biggest thing this year. That's my biggest priority, is seeing him win at a level where we can quit talking about his job security. And the biggest question around him becomes, when is he going to finally win a national championship? And if Carolina gets to the Elite Eight, that'll be the conversation we're having, more so than if he deserves to be the head coach of Carolina basketball or not. So that's a look at our season prediction the season preview for the upcoming year, with the three biggest storylines, a game of true or false, and our bold predictions going into the 2025-2026 season, which does get underway Monday night against Central Arkansas in the Smith Center. I got a few closing notes to hand out to you guys before we get out of this edition of the show. A bunch of preseason, award watch lists were released earlier this week, and there's a bunch of Carolina flavor on them. Seth Trimble was named to the Jerry West Award watch list. He's one of 20 players named to that. Henry Vesar was named to the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Award watch list. That goes out to the best center in college basketball. And then Caleb Wilson was named to the Karl Malone Award watch list, which is handed out every year to the best power forward in all of college basketball. So just a few closing notes right there for you guys. Bunch of Carolina guys on some pretty big preseason award watch list, which just speaks volumes of the type of talent that this roster does possess, as opposed to maybe the roster we saw last year or maybe in some other years. In the meantime, that's going to wrap up this edition of the show. We will direct you guys to the website, HeelToughBlog.com, where we'll have full coverage of Carolina's season opener against Central Arkansas. There'll be a game preview posted, and, of course, a game recap posted, as well as, we're basically now in season mode with previews and recaps coming at you left and right. Any news and notes in and around the program will be found on the website as well. That's HeelToughBlog.com. As for football, Big win last night for Bill Belichick and the Heels. They win at Syracuse 27-10. That recap will be posted for you guys, and you can go read the biggest takeaways from the first Power Conference win under Bill Belichick at UNC. We'll be turning our attention to Stanford next week as Carolina's back in Kenan Stadium, looking to continue their strong play across the back half of the season. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we will pop up. There, we encourage you guys rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show during the season. The schedule looks like this as for right now. Central Arkansas preview will come out on Sunday night. That Central Arkansas recap will come at you on Tuesday. Kansas preview on Wednesday. Kansas recap maybe Friday night. Could be pushed back to Saturday depending on some circumstances. We're also supposed to have interviews with Brendan Marks and Debbie Antonelli next week as well. So you want to make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss any of those previews, recaps, interviews covering Carolina basketball. And if you're a video consumer, best way to keep up with the videos, like and follow us on Facebook at Heel Tough Blog. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow me on Twitter at HTB_Josh. Once we go live, you'll get a notification sent right to your phone. You can hop in and hear the best coverage of Carolina basketball. But with that, folks, that is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.